My name is Evelyn Grant, I'm 68 years old, and last Tuesday night, my 6-year-old grandson called me crying, "Grandma, I'm so hungry." He locked me in. "Mom won't wake up." The line went dead. I didn't even grab a coat, I just ran for my keys. Before I tell you what I found inside that house, please tap like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened next changed our family forever. What I saw when I broke that window. I still see it every night when I close my eyes. The road stretched ahead of me like a black ribbon, my headlights cutting through the darkness while my hands shook on the steering wheel. It was 11:47 p.m. when I pulled out of my driveway, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. The silence was deafening, no radio, no music, just the sound of my old Honda's engine and the blood rushing in my ears. Every mile felt like forever, every red light like a personal insult from the universe. I kept hearing Liam's voice echoing in my head, that tiny, broken whisper, "I'm so hungry, Grandma." The way he said it, like he was apologizing for needing food. Like he was sorry for existing. God, how many times did I replay those words during that 20-minute drive? How many times did I press harder on the gas pedal, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest and get to him faster than my body could manage? The highway was empty except for the occasional truck driver pushing through the night, their headlights blazing past me like angry stars. I tried calling Rachel's phone again and again. Ring after ring after ring, then straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Rachel, leave a message after the beep." That cheerful voice from before Derek entered our lives like a poison. Before everything went to hell in a handbasket made of broken promises and empty bottles. I hung up and called again. And again. And again. Each time, that same bright voicemail greeting mocked me. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? Why wasn't she protecting her son? The silence on the other end felt like a scream that only I could hear, a mother's intuition turned into a grandmother's nightmare. You have to understand, I hadn't seen them in 3 months. 3 long, agonizing months since Rachel told me I was interfering and needed to back off and let her live her life. 3 months since Derek made it abundantly clear that I wasn't welcome in their house anymore, that my meddling was causing problems in their relationship. 3 months of sleepless nights wondering if my grandson was okay, if my daughter was safe, if I should have fought harder to stay in their lives instead of respecting her wishes like some fool. I should have known. God help me, I should have known something was desperately wrong when Rachel stopped returning my calls completely. When Liam's 6th birthday came and went without so much as a photo sent to my phone, the same phone that used to be flooded with pictures of his gap-toothed smiles and finger-painted masterpieces. When my Christmas cards came back marked "Return to Sender" in Derek's angry handwriting. When the neighbors stopped mentioning seeing them at the grocery store or the park. I kept telling myself she was just angry, that she'd come around eventually, that this was just another one of her rebellious phases like when she was 16 and decided I was the enemy for enforcing curfew. But mothers know things. Deep down in our bones, in that place where intuition lives and festers, we know when our children are in danger. And I ignored that knowing because I was scared. Scared of losing what little connection I had left, scared of being cut out completely, scared of being labeled the interfering mother-in-law from hell. The highway blurred through my tears as I remembered the last conversation we'd had. Rachel had been defensive, her voice sharp with that particular edge she got when she was hiding something. "Mom, Derek thinks you don't respect our family. He thinks you're trying to turn Liam against him." And like a fool, I'd backed down. I'd apologized for caring too much, for asking too many questions about why Liam had seemed so quiet during our last visit, why he'd clung to me when it was time to go home. "Please, God," I whispered into the empty car, my voice breaking on each word, "please let him be okay. Please let me not be too late. Please let me be strong enough for whatever I'm about to find." The words felt like prayers and confessions all at once, spilling out of me like a dam had burst. When I turned onto Pine Hollow Road, past the familiar landmarks of my daughter's neighborhood, every house was dark, except theirs. The porch light was flickering like a dying heartbeat, casting these sick yellow shadows across the front yard that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. The bulb was old, probably burned out weeks ago, but still struggling to provide some semblance of illumination. I pulled into their driveway behind Derek's pickup truck, that massive black monster he was so proud of, along with two other cars I didn't recognize. Probably his drinking buddies. The house looked different somehow. Smaller. Sadder. Like it was holding its breath and waiting for something terrible to happen. The lawn was overgrown, weeds poking through what used to be Rachel's carefully maintained flower beds. The mailbox was overflowing with bills and notices, some scattered on the ground where they'd fallen. Paint was peeling from the front door, and one of the shutters hung at an odd angle. This wasn't the house where I used to bring Liam cookies and read him stories on Sunday afternoons. This was something else entirely, a place where hope had gone to die. I rang the doorbell, my finger stabbing the button with desperate urgency. Nothing. Not even the sound of the bell echoing inside. Broken, probably. I knocked, harder than I probably should have, my knuckles stinging against the wood. Rachel. It's Mom. My voice cracked on her name, high and desperate in the night air. Rachel, I got a call from Liam. He needs help. Still nothing. Not a sound from inside except maybe the distant murmur of a television or radio. The neighborhood was cemetery quiet, just my ragged breathing and the distant hum of highway traffic. No dogs barking, no late-night conversations drifting from open windows. It was like the whole street was pretending not to notice whatever was happening at 1247 Pine Hollow Road. Like everyone had collectively decided that some problems were too big, too messy, too complicated to get involved with. I walked around to the back of the house, my feet crunching through dead leaves that should have been raked months ago. My arthritic knees protested every step, but adrenaline kept me moving. The kitchen window was dark, but I could see shapes inside, bottles on the counter, stacks of what might have been takeout containers, garbage bags that hadn't made it to the curb. My stomach turned. The kitchen where Rachel used to make elaborate birthday cakes and Sunday morning pancakes was now a monument to neglect. I kept walking, checking windows, calling their names into the night. Most of the curtains were drawn, but here and there I could glimpse the chaos inside. A living room filled with empty bottles and overflowing ashtrays. A dining room table buried under bills and dirty dishes. This was the house where my grandson lived. This was what I'd been kept away from for 3 months. That's when I saw it. A tiny face pressed against an upstairs window. Just for a second, pale and thin in the flickering porch light. Then nothing, like a ghost vanishing back into the darkness. But I knew that face. I knew my grandson's features like I knew my own heartbeat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely feel my fingers anymore, but I forced them to work, to pick up the biggest rock I could find in Rachel's old flower garden. The garden where we'd planted sunflowers together when she was pregnant with Liam, when she was so excited about being a mother, when she'd rub her belly and talk about all the things she'd teach him. Now it was just weeds and broken dreams and a grandmother picking up a rock to save the child her daughter had forgotten how to protect. I didn't think twice. I didn't consider the legal implications or worry about property damage or think about what the neighbors might say. I drew back my arm and threw that rock with every ounce of strength and desperation I had left in my 68-year-old body. The window exploded inward with a sound like the world breaking apart. Glass scattered across the kitchen floor, glittering in the weak light like deadly diamonds. I cleared the jagged edges with my jacket sleeve, feeling the sharp points bite through the fabric and nick my palm. Blood dripped onto the windowsill, mixing with the glass shards, but I didn't care. Pain was nothing compared to the urgency driving me forward. I climbed through that window like a woman half my age, my old bones protesting with every movement, my skin catching on remaining glass fragments that left tiny cuts along my arms. The smell that hit me when I got inside made my stomach turn and my eyes water. It was the smell of neglect, of rotting food and stale alcohol and unwashed bodies and something else I couldn't identify but made my skin crawl. It was the smell of a family falling apart, of love dying by degrees, of a little boy's childhood being poisoned by adult failures. The kitchen was worse up close. Empty bottles everywhere, whiskey, beer, cheap wine, some still containing backwash that had turned green with age. Fast food containers covered every surface, some growing fuzzy mold that looked like science experiments gone wrong. Fruit flies buzzed around overripe bananas that had liquefied in their peels. Dishes were piled in the sink and stacked on counters, crusted with food that had hardened into concrete-like substances. But it was the living room that broke my heart completely. It was a disaster zone that spoke of people who had given up on everything that mattered. Empty bottles everywhere, fast food containers growing things that shouldn't exist outside a laboratory, clothes scattered across furniture that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. The coffee table was buried under bills marked "Final Notice" and empty prescription bottles and ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts. And there, on the couch that used to be Rachel's pride and joy, the one she'd saved for months to buy when she first moved into this house, was my daughter. Rachel was passed out, her face gray and sunken like someone had drained all the life out of her with a straw. Her skin had that waxy, unhealthy pallor that comes from malnutrition and substance abuse. Her hair, once thick and shiny, hung in greasy strings around her face. She was so thin that her clothes hung off her like she was a scarecrow dressed in human clothing. Her breathing was so shallow I had to put my ear to her chest to make sure she was still alive, my hands shaking as I checked for signs of life. Her pulse was there, faint but steady, like a whisper of the strong woman she used to be. She smelled like whiskey and defeat and broken promises. This wasn't the woman who used to call me every Sunday to chat about her week, who used to send me pictures of Liam's drawings and his gap-toothed smiles, who used to worry about whether she was doing a good job as a mother. This was a stranger wearing my daughter's face, a hollow shell of the person who had once been my greatest pride and joy. I wanted to shake her awake, to scream at her, to demand answers for what had happened to my grandson. But there wasn't time for that anger, not yet. Because somewhere in this house of horrors was a 6-year-old boy who needed his grandmother more than he had ever needed anyone in his short life. Then I heard it, a faint sob from upstairs. A sound that cut through my heart like a rusty blade, thin and desperate and so very small. It was the sound of a child crying alone in the dark, and it activated every protective instinct I'd spent 6 decades developing as a mother and grandmother. I climbed those stairs faster than I'd moved in years, my arthritic knee screaming in protest but my heart demanding speed. The staircase was carpeted, but the carpet was stained and worn through in places. Family photos still hung on the walls, pictures from happier times when Rachel's eyes were bright and Liam's cheeks were round and everyone looked like they believed in forever. Those photos mocked me now, showing me what we'd lost, what I'd failed to protect. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway lined with doors. Most of them were open, revealing empty bedrooms filled with more chaos. Rachel's room was a nest of dirty clothes and empty bottles. The bathroom was a disaster of hygiene products and prescription bottles and towels that hadn't been washed in weeks. But at the end of the hall, there was a small door. Liam's room. And there was a lock on the outside. A brand new deadbolt lock. On the outside. Of a 6-year-old's bedroom. The implications hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my vision blur with rage and horror. Someone had installed a lock to keep my grandson trapped in his own room like a prisoner. Like an animal. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely turn the deadbolt. The metal was cold and new, recently installed, probably within the last few weeks. When the lock finally clicked open, I pushed on the door and it stuck. Something was blocking it from the inside. I pushed harder, my shoulder burning with the effort, using every ounce of strength left in my old body until there was enough space for me to squeeze through. The room was dark except for a nightlight shaped like a dinosaur, one I'd given Liam for his 4th birthday, back when his biggest worry was monsters under the bed instead of monsters in his own house. The dinosaur cast eerie shadows on the walls, making everything look distorted and wrong. And there, huddled in the corner with a blanket pulled over his tiny shoulders, was my grandson. He was so thin. Dear God in heaven, he was so thin. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes too big for his face, his skin pale as paper. He looked like those heartbreaking photos of children in war zones, victims of conflicts they never asked to be part of. His hair, once thick and unruly like his father's, was brittle and dull. His lips were cracked from dehydration. In his arms, he clutched an old toy truck, his father's truck, the one I'd saved from when my son David died in Afghanistan. The same truck David had played with as a boy, that I'd carefully preserved for the grandson he'd never get to meet. It was battered now, missing a wheel and covered in duct tape, but Liam held it like it was made of golden memories. When he saw me, his face crumpled and tears spilled down his cheeks. "Grandma?" His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from crying and dehydration. "Grandma, I knew you'd come. I told Daddy's truck you'd come find me." I dropped to my knees beside him, my old joints protesting, but nothing mattered except getting to my grandson. I pulled him into my arms and he weighed nothing. Nothing at all. I could feel his ribs through his thin pajamas, count the bones in his spine as he pressed against me with desperate strength. His body was a map of neglect, every sharp angle where there should have been soft child flesh, every prominent bone where there should have been healthy padding. "I'm here, baby," I whispered, my voice breaking on every word. "Grandma's here. You're safe now. You're safe." The words felt inadequate, too small for the enormity of what had been done to him, but they were all I had. He clung to me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had gone completely insane. His small hands fisted in my jacket, holding on with the desperate strength of someone who had been abandoned too many times. "I was so hungry, Grandma. And he said I was bad. He said bad boys don't get dinner. But I wasn't bad. I promise I wasn't bad. I just asked for a sandwich because my tummy hurt so much." The words poured out of him in gasps and sobs, each one hitting me like a physical blow. "He locked me in here 3 days ago. Maybe 4. I can't remember. Mom was sleeping and wouldn't wake up. I tried to wake her up but she just made those scary noises and rolled over. I called you on Mom's phone when he went to the store, but I had to whisper so he wouldn't hear me. You're not bad, sweetheart. You're perfect. You're absolutely perfect, and none of this is your fault." I held him tighter, feeling his tears soak through my shirt, feeling his small body shake with exhaustion and relief. "We're going to get you something to eat, okay? We're going to take care of you. Nobody's ever going to lock you up again." He pulled back just enough to look at me with those big eyes that looked too old for his face. "Promise, Grandma? Promise he can't lock me up anymore?" "I promise," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I promise you're safe now." And then I heard the front door slam downstairs, followed by heavy footsteps and Derek's voice, slurred and angry. "What the hell is going on up here? Who broke my goddamn window? Rachel, you better not have let that old bitch in my house." The sound of his voice made Liam flinch and burrow deeper into my arms. I could feel his whole body start to shake, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was the voice of his tormentor, the man who had turned his childhood into a nightmare of hunger and fear and locked doors. I stood up slowly, my joints screaming in protest, and positioned myself between Liam and the doorway. My grandson scrambled behind me, his small hands gripping my jacket, his face buried against my back. I could feel his terror radiating through his thin body, the way he tried to make himself invisible behind my frame. Derek appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud given human form. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that spoke of manual labor and bar fights. His eyes were bloodshot and mean, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. He'd been drinking heavily, the smell of whiskey rolled off him in waves so strong they made my eyes water. His clothes were stained and wrinkled, his hair greasy and unkempt. Well. Grandma finally decided to pay us a visit. His voice was thick with sarcasm and something much darker, something that made my skin crawl. "Rachel told you to stay away, old lady. This is breaking and entering. This is trespassing. I could have you arrested." My voice was trembling, but I forced it to stay steady. I'd faced down plenty of bullies in my 68 years, And I wasn't about to be intimidated by this monster who tortured children. That child called me. He's hungry and scared and locked in his room like an animal. I'm taking him home with me tonight. Derek laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying dreams. You're not taking anybody anywhere, you interfering old bitch. That kid needs to learn discipline. Something his worthless mother never taught him. Kids today are soft, spoiled. A little hunger builds character. I could feel Liam trembling behind me, his hands clutching at my clothes. The fury that rose in me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just anger, this was rage in its purest form, the kind that makes grandmothers lift cars off grandchildren. Character? I spat. You call starving a 6-year-old child character building? You call locking him in his room for days discipline? You're not teaching him anything except fear and pain. Derek stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists the size of ham hocks. His eyes were wild, unfocused, but filled with a violence that made my blood run cold. You don't know what you're talking about, you stupid old cow. That kid is a little manipulator, just like his mother. He cries and whines to get attention. A little hunger teaches kids to appreciate what they have. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers and dialed 911, putting it on speaker so Derek could hear every word. 911, what's your emergency? This is Evelyn Grant. I'm at 1247, Pine Hollow Road. I found my 6-year-old grandson locked in his room, severely malnourished and terrified. The man who's been abusing him is here and drunk and threatening us. Please send police and an ambulance immediately. Derek's face went white, then red with a rage so intense I thought he might have a stroke right there in front of us. His hands clenched and unclenched as he processed what I'd just done, the implications of having the authorities called on him. You stupid old bitch, he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. You have no idea what you just did. No idea what kind of trouble you just brought down on all of us. When they're gone, when it's just you and me, you're going to pay for this. But I could hear them already, sirens in the distance, getting closer. The cavalry was coming. Help was on the way. I stepped forward, my chin raised, my arms spread wide to shield Liam from this monster who had made his life a living hell. Then arrest me too, I said, my voice stronger now, filled with the righteous fury of a grandmother protecting her grandchild. I'm not leaving him here. Not for another minute. Not for another second. Derek moved toward the door, trying to block our exit, his bulk filling the doorway. Nobody's going anywhere until I figure out how to fix this mess. Nobody's talking to any cops. We're going to handle this as a family. We're not your family, I said firmly. And this child isn't staying in this house of horrors another night. The sirens were getting louder now, close enough that we could hear multiple vehicles. Derek's face was a mask of panic and rage as he realized his world was about to come crashing down around him. That's when the police broke through that shattered window I'd crawled through 20 minutes earlier, and everything exploded into chaos. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting voices and crackling radios and Derek screaming about his rights while 2 officers wrestled him to the ground. This is harassment. This is breaking and entering. That old bitch has no right to be in my house. His voice was high and desperate as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I held Liam the entire time, his face buried against my shoulder, my hands covering his ears so he wouldn't have to hear the worst of the chaos. But I could feel his small body relaxing incrementally as Derek was led away, as the immediate threat was removed from his world. An EMT tried to approach us, a young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who moved slowly so as not to frighten Liam. Ma'am, we need to get the child to the hospital. From what I can see, he appears to be severely dehydrated and malnourished. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Liam wouldn't let go of me, not for a second. When they tried to put him on a gurney, he clung to me with surprising strength for such a weakened child. Grandma comes too, he whispered urgently. Please don't leave me. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart, I promised. Grandma's staying right with you. They loaded us into the ambulance together. Liam sat on my lap during the ride, finally quiet but clinging to my hand like a lifeline. I stroked his hair and whispered stories I remembered from when he was smaller, when the world made sense and families weren't supposed to break apart like shattered glass. I told him about the time his father caught fireflies in mason jars when he was little, how he'd release them one by one like tiny lanterns into the summer night. I told him about the fort his father and I had built in the backyard, how we'd had tea parties with his teddy bears and planned adventures to imaginary kingdoms. The hospital lights were too bright, too harsh after the darkness of that house. Everything smelled like antiseptic and floor wax and the particular sadness that seems to permeate pediatric emergency rooms. They wheeled us into a room where nurses with soft voices and careful hands began their work. They weighed him first, 38 pounds. He should have been closer to 55 for a healthy 6-year-old. The number hit me like a physical blow. My grandson had lost almost a third of his body weight. They started in 4 for fluids, his little arms so thin the needle looked enormous. They took blood samples to check for malnutrition markers and dehydration levels. They documented every bruise and mark on his tiny body with photographs that would later be used as evidence. There were bruises in various stages of healing, some fresh and purple, others yellow-green and fading. Finger-shaped marks on his upper arms from being grabbed too roughly. A healing cut on his lip. Welts on his back that looked suspiciously like belt marks. Each discovery made the nurses exchange meaningful glances, made them document more carefully, made them speak in the hushed tones reserved for the worst kinds of cases. The doctor who examined him was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes who'd probably seen too much human cruelty in his career. Dr. Peterson spoke to me in quiet, measured tones while Liam finally slept, his small body finally relaxed enough to let exhaustion take over. Mrs. Grant, I need you to understand the severity of what we're seeing here, he said, his pen hovering over his clipboard as he chose his words carefully. This child has been systematically starved. The level of malnutrition suggests prolonged food deprivation. The bruising patterns indicate repeated physical abuse. There are signs of severe psychological trauma as well. He paused, looking at my grandson's sleeping form. Someone's been torturing this little boy, Mrs. Grant. There's no other word for it. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I sank into the plastic chair beside Liam's bed, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. The full reality of what had been happening crashed over me like a tsunami of guilt and horror. How long? I whispered, barely able to form the words. How long has this been going on? Dr. Peterson consulted his notes, his expression grave. Based on the medical evidence, the degree of malnutrition, the various stages of healing we see in the bruising patterns, I'd estimate this has been happening for at least 3 to 4 months. Possibly longer. 3 to 4 months. The timeline matched perfectly with when Derek had convinced Rachel to cut me out of their lives. While I was at home respecting boundaries and giving them space, my grandson was being systematically tortured. While I was telling myself to be patient, to wait for Rachel to come around, he was crying himself to sleep hungry and afraid and locked in that room like a prisoner. I must have made a sound, a sob or a gasp or some other noise that indicated my world was collapsing, because Dr. Peterson's expression softened with professional compassion. Mrs. Grant, he said gently, you saved his life. If you hadn't gone there tonight, if you hadn't broken that window and gotten him out. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We both knew what would have happened if I'd waited until morning, if I'd decided to call someone else, if I'd been too afraid to act. A woman from Child Protective Services arrived around midnight. Her name was Jennifer Collins, and she had that particular combination of professional competence and genuine compassion that told me she'd been doing this heartbreaking job for a long time. She was probably in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. She asked questions while I signed papers with shaking hands, emergency custody forms that would let me take Liam home, at least temporarily. Forms that would keep Derek away from him permanently. Forms that would start the legal process of determining what would happen to my daughter and my grandson and what was left of our broken family. What about Rachel? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What about my daughter? Jennifer's expression was carefully neutral, professionally non-judgmental. She's been arrested along with Mr. Hoffman. The charges include child abuse, child endangerment, and child neglect. She'll have opportunities for rehabilitation, but right now, the absolute priority is Liam's safety and well-being. I looked at my grandson, sleeping finally, his small hand still clutched around mine even in unconsciousness. He looked so small in that hospital bed, hooked up to IVs and monitors, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed their electronic lullabies. I failed him, I whispered, the words scraping my throat raw. I should have fought harder to stay in their lives. I should have known something was wrong. I should have broken down that door months ago. Mrs. Grant, Jennifer said firmly, leaning forward in her chair, you're the reason he's alive. You're the reason he's safe. You're the reason he has a chance at healing from this trauma. That's not failure. That's love in its purest form. But those words, well-meaning as they were, couldn't touch the guilt that was eating me alive from the inside out. I was his grandmother. I was supposed to protect him. And I'd let him suffer for months because I was too afraid of confrontation, too willing to respect boundaries that should never have existed when a child's safety was at stake. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and paperwork and phone calls. They fed Liam small amounts of liquid nutrition, careful not to overwhelm his shrunken stomach. They treated his dehydration and monitored his vital signs and took more photographs for evidence. Social workers came and went, asking questions and making notes and building the case that would eventually put Derek behind bars and determine Rachel's fate. But saving him once was only the beginning. The real battle was just starting. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyer meetings and court dates and trying to prove that a 68-year-old woman with arthritis and a fixed income could provide a better home than the foster care system. Derek's lawyer painted me as a well-meaning but naive elderly woman who didn't understand the complexities of modern child-rearing. He suggested that Liam needed structure and discipline that I couldn't provide at my age. My lawyer, Sarah Chen, was a sharp young woman who specialized in family law and had a personal investment in cases involving child abuse. She'd grown up in the foster care system herself and understood what was at stake in a way that transcended professional obligation. Mrs. Grant, she said during one of our preparation meetings, spreading documents across her conference table like battle plans, the evidence against Derek is overwhelming. But they're going to question your age, your ability to care for an active 6-year-old long-term. We need to be prepared for that attack. She was right. The financial abuse Derek had perpetrated was staggering in its cruelty and scope. He'd spent all of Rachel's survivor benefits, the money from my son David's death, meant to care for his child, on alcohol and gambling and God knows what else. There were bills unpaid, utilities shut off multiple times, a trail of financial destruction that painted a picture of systematic abuse that went far beyond the physical. The evidence was overwhelming. Neighbor testimonies about screaming and strange smells coming from the house. Teacher reports about Liam coming to school hungry, falling asleep in class, wearing the same clothes for days at a time. Doctor's notes documenting his steady decline over the past year, weight loss, behavioral changes, signs of chronic stress and malnutrition. Mrs. Henderson from next door testified that she'd called child services twice about suspected abuse but was told they needed more concrete evidence. I heard that little boy crying at all hours, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Heard him begging for food through the walls. But what was I supposed to do? I'm an old woman living alone. Liam's kindergarten teacher, Miss Rodriguez, broke down completely on the stand as she described watching a bright, happy child transform into a frightened, withdrawn shadow of himself. He used to be so vibrant, so eager to learn. But over the past few months, he became increasingly listless. He'd fall asleep during story time. He hoarded snacks from lunch. One day he asked me if teachers were allowed to give kids dinner because he wasn't sure if he'd get any at home. Dr. Martinez, the pediatric trauma specialist we'd started seeing, testified about the long-term effects of the abuse Liam had suffered. This child has been systematically traumatized over an extended period. The physical abuse was severe, but the psychological damage may take years to heal. He suffers from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. He has nightmares, separation anxiety, and a pathological fear of being left alone. But Derek's lawyer fought back hard. He painted Rachel as a victim of addiction who deserved compassion, not condemnation. He suggested that I was too old, too set in my ways, too financially limited to provide for a growing child's needs. He questioned my health, my energy levels, my ability to handle a traumatized child's complex emotional needs. Your Honor, he said during his closing arguments, while Mrs. Grant's love for her grandson is admirable, love alone isn't sufficient to raise a child who will require extensive therapy, medical care, and round-the-clock attention. This child needs a young, stable family with the resources and energy to meet his considerable needs. I sat there listening to him try to destroy me, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking with rage. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 68 years but drawing strength from my grandson's presence in the courtroom gallery. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, that lawyer is right about one thing, love alone isn't enough. But love combined with determination, experience, and an absolute commitment to this child's welfare is everything he needs to heal. I looked directly at the judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and no patience for legal posturing. I may be 68 years old, but I've raised 3 children successfully. I buried one son who died serving his country in Afghanistan, and I've watched another daughter struggle with addiction for years. I know what real love looks like, and I know what abuse looks like. That little boy spent months locked in a room, starving, while his mother chose drugs and his stepfather chose cruelty over basic human decency. My voice grew stronger as I continued. I chose to break a window and save his life. I chose to fight for custody when the system wanted to place him with strangers. I chose to spend my retirement savings on lawyers and therapy and whatever else he needs to heal. And I'll choose him every day for the rest of my life, however many days that might be. I paused, looking at Liam where he sat with Jennifer from CPS. He was still so thin, still so fragile, but there was light in his eyes again. Hope. Age doesn't determine your capacity to love, Your Honor. Action does. And my actions speak for themselves. The judge took a recess to consider her decision. Those 20 minutes felt like hours as I sat in the hallway with Sarah, watching Liam color in a book Jennifer had brought him. He was drawing a house with smoke coming from the chimney and 2 stick figures holding hands in the front yard. That's us, Grandma, he said, showing me his artwork. You and me in our house where nobody locks doors and everybody gets dinner. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression was unreadable. She'd seen the photos, read the medical reports, heard the testimony from teachers and neighbors and doctors. She knew what had happened in that house on Pine Hollow Road. In my 30 years on the bench, she began, I've seen the best and worst of human nature. I've seen families destroyed by addiction, children failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them, and grandparents who stepped up when parents stepped down. She looked directly at me. Mrs. Grant, this court has reviewed all the evidence, considered all the testimony, and evaluated all the options available for this child's care. Full custody is awarded to Mrs. Evelyn Grant, with supervised visitation rights to be determined for the mother pending successful completion of court-ordered rehabilitation programs. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Mr. Hoffman's parental rights are permanently terminated. This court trusts that you will provide the safe, loving home this child deserves. I cried then. Right there in the courtroom, I sobbed like a baby while Liam climbed into my lap and hugged me tight. We won, Grandma, he whispered. We won. But winning in court and winning in real life are 2 entirely different battles. The first few months were harder than I'd anticipated in my worst-case scenario planning. Liam had nightmares every single night, waking up screaming about being locked up, about being hungry, about men with angry voices who hurt little boys. He'd wake up in a panic, not knowing where he was, convinced he was back in that room with the lock on the outside. I'd find him hoarding food under his bed at 2 in the morning, crackers and fruit snacks and granola bars hidden like precious treasures. He was preparing for the next siege, the next time the adults in his life would fail him and leave him starving. No amount of reassurance could convince his traumatized brain that food would always be available, that he was safe now. He flinched when I moved too quickly, apologized for everything from breathing too loudly to needing to use the bathroom. He asked permission for the most basic human needs. Grandma, is it okay if I'm thirsty? Grandma, am I allowed to be tired? Grandma, is it bad if my stomach makes noises? Some days I felt so overwhelmed I could barely breathe. This wasn't the sweet, easy grandmothering I'd imagined during my retirement years. This was trauma recovery, and I had no idea what I was doing half the time. I was making it up as I went along, following instincts and Google searches and advice from Dr. Martinez in equal measure. There were days when Liam would have complete meltdowns over seemingly minor things, a door closing too loudly, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the sight of deadbolt locks on any door anywhere. His nervous system was stuck in permanent fight-or-flight mode, hypervigilant for threats that were no longer there. Dr. Martinez was a godsend during those early months. She was a patient woman in her 50s who specialized in childhood trauma and understood the long, complicated journey we were embarking on together. "He's not just learning to trust you," she explained after one of our sessions where Liam had spent the entire hour hiding under her desk. "He's learning to trust the world again. That takes time, Mrs. Grant. Healing isn't linear, and it isn't fast." But there were victories too, small ones that felt like miracles. The first night he slept through without nightmares, I woke up in a panic and ran to his room, only to find him peaceful and still, his breathing deep and even. The morning he laughed at cartoons on TV, a real belly laugh that filled my house with joy I hadn't heard in months. The day he asked for seconds at dinner without apologizing or asking permission first. There was the afternoon he brought me a drawing he'd made at school, 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun with a huge smile. The house in the background had windows and a door that wasn't locked, and flowers in the front yard. "That's us, Grandma," he said proudly, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "You and me in our house where people don't get locked up and nobody goes hungry. Our house." My heart nearly burst with pride and love and relief. He started gaining weight slowly but steadily. His cheeks filled out, his ribs stopped showing through his shirts. He grew 3 inches in 6 months, like his body was making up for lost time. The teacher said he was catching up academically, making friends, joining in activities instead of sitting alone and afraid. He was becoming a little boy again instead of just a survivor. But I worried constantly about Rachel. She was in a residential treatment program 90 minutes away, fighting her own demons in a battle that was separate from but connected to our healing journey. Part of me was furious with her, angry that she'd let this happen, that she'd chosen a man over her son, that she'd broken our family so completely that we were all left picking up pieces. But part of me remembered the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me dandelions from the yard and called them the most beautiful flowers in the world, who cried for a week when her goldfish died because she was convinced it was her fault for not feeding it enough. I carried both versions of her in my heart, the daughter I'd raised with love and high hopes, and the stranger who'd nearly killed my grandson through neglect and poor choices. The love and the betrayal lived side by side, making every day a complicated balance of hope and fear, forgiveness and fury. The treatment facility sent updates every few weeks. Rachel was attending group therapy sessions, individual counseling, addiction education classes. She was learning about the neurological effects of substance abuse, the psychology of codependent relationships, the skills needed to rebuild a life worth living. Some days she was motivated and hopeful. Other days she could barely get out of bed. Recovery isn't a straight line, it's a messy, complicated journey full of setbacks and small victories and moments of clarity followed by periods of doubt. But she was trying. For the first time in years, she was actually trying to get better instead of just trying to get by. Then one morning, 6 months after that terrible night, the phone rang. It was 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Liam was at school learning about butterflies and practicing his letters. I was having my second cup of coffee and reading the newspaper when the phone shattered the peaceful quiet of my kitchen. A voice I hadn't heard in over a year said, "Mom, it's me." Rachel was calling from the treatment center. Her voice was different, clearer somehow, like fog had lifted from her brain, but fragile as spun glass. There was an awareness in her tone that hadn't been there before, a presence that told me she was actually inhabiting her own life again instead of just surviving it. "I'm 8 months clean," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "They said I could call you. They said I was ready to start making amends." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, my hand pressed to my chest where my heart was hammering like it was trying to escape. "Rachel. Mom, I'm so sorry." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been practicing them but was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she didn't say them quickly. "God, I'm so sorry for everything. For what I let happen to Liam. For cutting you out of our lives. For choosing Derek over my own son. For being such a complete failure as a daughter and a mother." She was crying now, big ugly sobs that came through the phone line like physical blows. "Is Liam okay? Please tell me he's okay. Please tell me I didn't break him completely." I looked out the window where I could see the swing set I'd installed in the backyard, the sandbox where Liam had spent hours last weekend building elaborate castles and roads for his toy trucks. "He's healing," I said carefully, choosing my words like I was walking through a minefield. "We both are." "I remember bits and pieces of that night," she whispered. "I was so high I could barely think straight, but I knew Derek was going to hurt him again. I knew, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't protect my own son." Her voice broke completely. "What kind of mother does that make me? What kind of monster fails that completely?" "You're not a monster," I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "You're sick. Addiction is a sickness, not a moral failing. But you're getting help now. That's what matters." We talked for 45 minutes. She told me about group therapy sessions where she'd had to face what she'd done, about individual counseling where she was learning to understand the choices that had led her down such a dark path. She told me about medication that was helping with the depression that had plagued her since David's death, about learning to process grief without numbing it with substances. She asked about Liam's school, his friends, his nightmares, his progress in therapy. She didn't ask to see him, not yet. She knew she had more work to do first, more healing to accomplish before she could face the child she'd failed so completely. "I might not deserve a second chance," she said before we hung up. "I know I might have lost that right forever. But if I can earn one, if you can ever forgive me, if Liam can ever forgive me." "Rachel," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't something you earn like a paycheck. It's something you receive like grace. And healing isn't a destination you arrive at, it's a choice you make every day." Over the next 6 months, we talked regularly. Sometimes she was strong and hopeful, sharing victories from group therapy and milestones in her recovery. Sometimes she was broken and barely holding on, calling me at midnight when the guilt threatened to drown her and she needed to hear a voice that remembered who she used to be. Recovery isn't a straight line, it's a series of peaks and valleys, breakthroughs and setbacks, moments of clarity followed by periods of struggle. But she kept calling. She kept showing up for herself and, gradually, for us. She kept fighting for the chance to be the mother and daughter we all needed her to be. Dr. Martinez helped prepare Liam for the possibility of supervised visits. We started slowly, letters and cards first, then brief video calls where Rachel could see how much he'd grown and changed. The first time they talked, he hid behind my legs and wouldn't speak. By the 5th call, he was showing her his homework and telling her about his new friends at school. "You look bigger," Rachel said during one video call, tears streaming down her face as she watched him color at my kitchen table. "And happier. You look so much happier. Grandma makes really good pancakes," Liam said matter-of-factly. "And she never locks doors. And I have my own bed that's really soft and nobody can lock me in it." The pain that crossed Rachel's face was almost too much to bear. She knew exactly what he was referring to, exactly what had been done to him in her house while she was too high to care. But she didn't flinch away from it. That was progress, facing the truth instead of hiding from it. "I'm glad you're safe now," she said quietly. "I'm glad Grandma takes such good care of you." Rachel looked different in those video calls too. Healthier. Her eyes were clear for the first time in years, her hands steady. She'd gained weight and cut her hair short in a style that made her look younger, more like the woman she'd been before addiction tried to kill her soul. But the biggest change was harder to see. She carried herself like someone who was learning to forgive herself, one day at a time. "He's gotten so big," she said after one call, her voice thick with emotion and regret. "I missed so much. I missed watching him grow up." "You can't get that time back," I said gently but firmly. "But you can be here for what comes next." The first supervised visit was terrifying for all of us. Rachel had been clean for 18 months and was living in a transitional housing program with strict supervision and support services. Liam had been doing well in therapy but still struggled with change and uncertainty. I was terrified of losing him again, of watching my daughter relapse, of this fragile progress falling apart like a house of cards in a strong wind. But they met at a neutral location with Jennifer from CPS present. They had pizza and played board games and talked about school and friends and all the normal things that had been absent from their relationship for so long. Liam was cautious but not afraid. Rachel was nervous but present in a way she hadn't been in years. When I picked him up, he ran to me with a huge grin. "Grandma. Mom remembered that I like extra cheese on my pizza. And she taught me how to play checkers." Then, more quietly, more thoughtfully, she said she's sorry she was sick. "And that she's better now." I looked at Rachel over his head. She was smiling through tears, her hands clasped tight in front of her to keep them from shaking. "I know I have a long way to go," she said. "But I want to be the mother he deserves. The daughter you raised me to be." But forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a decision you make over and over again, every day, sometimes every hour, sometimes every minute. There were still hard days after that first visit. Days when Rachel missed calls because she was struggling with depression or anxiety. Days when Liam had setbacks and asked if his mom was going to get sick again and disappear from his life. Days when I lay awake wondering if I was being naive, if I was putting my grandson at risk by allowing hope back into our lives. But there were good days too, increasingly more good days than bad. Family dinners where we all laughed together over Liam's silly jokes and his elaborate stories about school adventures. Liam's school play where Rachel sat in the front row and cheered louder than anyone when he forgot his lines and ad-libbed instead. Christmas morning where we opened presents under a tree we'd decorated together, all three generations figuring out how to be a family again. Rachel got her own apartment after 2 years in the program. A small but clean place with a bedroom for Liam decorated in dinosaurs and superheroes, and pictures of all of us on the refrigerator. She got a job at a local bakery, early morning hours that kept her busy and productive, honest work that gave her purpose and pride. She went to meetings every day and called her sponsor when things got hard. The legal custody arrangement evolved slowly and carefully. Shared custody first, then longer visits, then eventually week on, week off. I stayed close, always available, always watching, but learning to trust again too. Learning that people can change, that addiction doesn't have to be a death sentence, that families can heal even from the worst betrayals if everyone is willing to do the work. 2 years after that terrible night when my phone rang and changed everything, we were sitting around my dinner table, mother, grandmother, and child together. Liam was 8 now, taller and stronger and filled with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're loved unconditionally. Rachel was 34 and 3 years clean, working full-time and attending night school to get her nursing degree. Liam was helping Rachel with the dishes while I watched from my chair, my old bones too tired to do much more than supervise and offer advice nobody asked for. The sight of them working together, laughing over some private joke, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who were learning to trust again, it filled my heart to overflowing. "Grandma," Liam said, carefully drying a plate with the serious concentration he brought to everything these days. Remember when I called you that night? When I was really scared? My heart clenched. We didn't talk about that night very often anymore. The memories were still too raw, too painful for all of us. I remember, sweetheart. I knew you'd come. Even when I was really, really scared and didn't know if anybody loved me anymore, I knew you'd come get me. He looked at Rachel, then back at me, his expression wise beyond his years. And now Mom's better, and we're all together. We're not perfect, but we're still a family. Rachel's hand stilled in the soapy water. Where did you learn to be so wise? She asked him, her voice thick with emotion and wonder. From Grandma, he said matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She taught me that love means showing up. Even when it's really, really hard. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The woman standing at my sink wasn't the broken stranger who'd nearly destroyed everything we held dear. But she wasn't exactly the little girl I'd raised either, the one who used to believe that love conquered all and happy endings were guaranteed. She was something new, someone who'd walked through hell and come out scarred but stronger. Someone who'd learned that being a mother meant more than just biology. It meant choosing your child every single day, even when that choice was the hardest thing you'd ever do. I'm proud of you, I told her quietly, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Both of you. Rachel met my eyes, and I saw forgiveness there, not just mine for her, but hers for herself. That might have been the most important healing of all. We're going to be okay, she said with quiet conviction. All of us. And watching my grandson laugh while he helped his mother wash dishes, seeing the easy way they moved around each other now, the trust that had been rebuilt brick by careful brick over months and years of showing up and choosing love over fear. I believed her. That night, when the phone rang at 11:47 p.m., I thought I'd lost everything. The call that woke me from sleep, my grandson's terrified voice, the drive through darkness not knowing what I'd find. I thought it was the call that would destroy our family forever. But it turns out, it was the call that brought us back together. Not immediately, healing took time, forgiveness took work, trust had to be earned and re-earned every single day. But families aren't perfect. They're just people who choose to love each other through the worst times and the best times and all the ordinary moments in between. Sometimes that choice is easy. Sometimes it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But when you're sitting around a dinner table watching your grandson help his mother with dishes, hearing them laugh together like the world never tried to break them apart, you realize that love isn't about never falling down. It's about helping each other get back up. Do you think Rachel deserved a second chance? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes in redemption.